There are far too few checks and balances over mis and disinformation. And we have to bear in mind that children are largely getting their news sources from online sources and social media. So if there aren't those checks and balances, this could be shaping their worldview.
Hello and welcome to HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing. In today's episode, we're talking about digital parenting, helping children and young people stay safe, well and informed in an online world that's changing faster than ever. We're joined today by Alex Cooney, CEO and co-founder of CyberSafe Kids. We're going to explore their Same Rules Apply campaign, which supports parents and carers in navigating everything from screen time, social media to online predators, cyberbullying and AI. Whether your child is gaming, scrolling or chatting online, we look at the bigger risks and how to talk to them about it. Alex will give some practical advice to help you set healthy boundaries at home, protect your children's mental health and feel more confident as a digital parent. Thank you very much for joining us, Alex.
Thank you for having me on.
Let's just start off just about CyberSafe Kids.
Yeah, so CyberSafe Kids is a charity. We set it up 10 years ago with this mission to educate and equip children to be safe online. And we recognized very quickly that in order to do that effectively, yes, we needed to talk directly to kids, but we also needed to talk to people around them, to their parents, their carers, their educators. So we had this wider program where we would also go in and talk to those different groups. So over the 10 years that we've been going, I think we've spoken to around 80 or 90,000 children across the country.
Fantastic.
We've spoken to nearly 20,000 parents and caregivers. We've also spoken to lots of teachers, foster carers, social workers, youth workers. So really anyone who has a role in caring for or working with children, we want to work with. And about 4 years ago, we launched the first Same Rules Apply campaign. So this year was the fourth one, actually. And it's a really simple message. Same rules apply. So what we want to encourage parents to do and to support them to do is to think about parenting their children online as they would offline, as in think about how you would approach parenting your children offline, whether it's teaching them to ride a bike or cross a road safely or be safe around water or in the kitchen around knives and gas and other hazards. There's a sort of risk and opportunity ratio that we need to think about. So let's take riding a bike, which is a sort of simple analogy. As a parent, we approach it knowing that it's going to take time. You don't give an adult bike to a toddler and say, off you go. You know that you need to start out with the little balance bike or the little bike with the training wheels. You'll often take them to a safe place to start them off, a park. You'll be running alongside them, shouting out, remember to keep pedaling and look ahead of you and all of these messages. And we put the helmets and sometimes the knee pads for the inevitable mistakes that they might make. But the end goal, obviously, over a period of years is to get them to a place where they can go off independently.
Yeah.
You haven't removed all risk because you can't. Obviously, there's other road users, but you've done everything in your power as a parent to equip them with the skills to navigate safely on a bike, to make good decisions, and to be able to enjoy being able to go out independently in that way offers. So bringing that to an online world, that's the same way we need to approach it. We need to think about from the beginning that we're alongside them, that we're supporting them, we're using the safeguards that are available to us. We're really involved, especially in those early years as parents and caregivers. And we're really getting them or trying to get them to a place where they will go off more independently, where they will need a greater degree of privacy. So it's a preparation of years. It's not just a kind of one conversation and done or giving them advice and off you go. There really is a need for a lot of parental guidance, support and involvement in that journey.
And the way that you describe with the trainer bike and the trainer wheels, and you can actually see it, I can visualize that and how long it takes. So that's a really good way to describe it for parents. So really you're trying to empower, first of all, the parents with the information who can then empower the children with the information to be able to access online safely. But that's easier said than done, obviously. And many people feel really overwhelmed with technology. So where should they start?
And that's why we're doing this campaign. We do recognize that. If you think about teaching your child to ride a bike, it's something we were taught as children and our parents were taught. And we've got a whole structure in schools where these messages are also reinforced and there's road safety campaigns around it. So there's almost an infrastructure of support around teaching a child to ride a bike. We haven't quite got there with children being online. I think it caught up with us very quickly. If you think about it, it's a phenomenon of the last 20 years. The first iPhone went on the market in 2007. 18 years ago. And since that time, the affordability, the accessibility of these devices has been just growing with every year that passes. So more and more children are online. And of course, there's great fun to be had. There's great benefits, all these educational gains and great sources of entertainment. And I think we saw that more than ever in COVID. But COVID also marked a turning point with far greater children getting that access, but also we were seeing a lot more vulnerability. And I think because parents weren't parented on this themselves, they often do feel very quickly a bit at sea about all of this. We recognize that we're going to have to support parents too. It's not just a question of saying to parents, well, you need to support your kids. We recognize we've got to provide the guidance, the support, the encouragement to parents so that they can do this effectively. And it is easier said than done. So it's important that we also think about the stage that parents are at. Because what you don't want is a parent of teenagers listening in and going, well, this is all well and good telling me about teaching a kid to ride a bike, but my kids are already, the battle is lost. So we want to support those parents too, to try and re-engage, connect with their kids. If they haven't got ground rules, to try and put a few ground rules in place in the best interest of their kids. We want to try and support parents at whatever stage they're at with their kids online.
Yeah, that's the thing. There are all those kids that already have all of the devices. And is it too late? I'm a mother of 4, so it's all about communication with their kids. And I'm not sitting here all high and mighty thinking, oh yeah, I communicate with my kids and everything, and my Johnny wouldn't do this. But it's very difficult for parents once the kids are off and running with it. Pull back. How do you pull back on it as a parent? Without the kids not getting involved in things, not knowing what's going on online when everybody else is watching it. How do you pull that back?
Yeah, it is really tricky for parents of teens where maybe they didn't put the rules in. They allowed the access because they kind of felt, well, everybody's getting this access, so I don't want my child left out. Therefore, I will give them the device and the access to these different social media apps and gaming apps. And then all of a sudden, it's really tricky and you're finding that your kids are tired because they're up at night on these devices. They're communicating more on these devices than they are with their family members in person.
Oh yeah, you're sitting around the sitting room, everybody's on their device.
Everyone's on their devices, sometimes more than one device. I've heard of double screening, triple screening, and I'd say we're all guilty of that at some stage. So it's really thinking about how do we want this to go in the household, healthy habits in the household. So first of all, look at yourself, shine a mirror on yourself. What are your habits? If you're constantly on your device as the parent, while your kids are around you, it's going to be a difficult message to say, well, you all need to get off, but I'm okay to be on. So trying to think about having times and places in the house where you're not on your devices. So good ideas around device-free meal times, trying to have one meal a day, maybe it's the evening meal, where everybody comes together or everybody that's around comes together and you put your devices aside. So we have this kind of communication, face-to-face communication, and we encourage that as a household. The other really big one is bedrooms, trying to keep devices out of bedrooms. So one of the statistics that we released when we were launching this campaign on Safer Internet Day was that over 80% of children, 8 to 12-year-olds, told us that they had no rules at all around device use in the bedroom. And to our mind, that is a really worthwhile battle having with your kids, whether they are in the 8 to 12 category or in the teen category. Keeping devices, and I don't just mean phones, I mean all smart devices, the games consoles, the tablets, out of the bedroom, especially overnight, because at a simple level, it just disrupts sleep. But, then there's also the concerns around what they're being exposed to online, who they're talking to, how much time they're spending, all of these questions. You are really excluded as the parent or carer from what's going on in that bedroom overnight. That is a battle worth having, those ground rules, and trying to do so yourself. Going back to that point, if it's about an alarm clock, get an alarm clock. There's plenty of alternatives. It's about listening to music. There are ways of doing that without having the device in your bedroom. So I do think we need to think of alternatives and we need to think about healthy practices in the household and obviously good open conversations as well.
Okay. So I feel like we've gone on to the next stage, but let's bring it right back. If I was lucky enough that it was my first child and they were in 6th class or they were 9 or 10, and it's usually the time where they're looking for a phone. What's the best time? If we just even start with that, what's the best time to get a phone?
Well, let's start with broadening it out from phones, right? Because actually with an 8 to 10-year-old, we see that they're more likely to have a tablet or a games console than they are a phone. The phone ownership increases age 11. That's what we're seeing in our trends and usage data.
So we think, it's okay to give them a games console and it's okay to give them an iPad, but there's dangers there too, I guess.
Well, they connect to all the same things in many cases as the phone. Yes, the phone is the most portable. So that's the one they're out and about with. And that's the one you see kids out and about with. But actually bring it back to the home. Where are they on their devices? When are they on their devices? So any device that connects to the internet, if they're in a bedroom with their door shut, you're excluded. So trying to avoid that to the extent possible. Really thinking about whether they need their own device and whether, in fact, a family device might be better. Like a family tablet that it remains a privilege to use, family games console that they have to negotiate and share and squabble over. But it isn't one child's right to have that and to use it whenever they want. So having clear rules around use and access, I would really argue that they don't necessarily need to have those individual devices, certainly before the age of 13. As they go into secondary school, it gets more complicated. Often they're required to have things like an iPad for school. And a lot of parents would be worried about their kids going to and from school and want that ability to connect with them. So then we need to think about, okay, first of all, are there alternatives, like in terms of the phone, to giving them a smartphone? So that we hear about these watches. And my son, for example, got an Explorer watch when he was 10 because he was starting to walk home from school, and it was quite a walk. I think it was nearly an hour. So he and a friend would walk home together, and they both had these watches. They don't connect to the internet, but they do have a GPS tracking, and I was able to add the numbers myself. And if a random number tried to call that, it would just be like, this number doesn't exist. So it's only the numbers that the parent or guardian adds. If your primary interest is being able to allow them a bit more independence, but you still want to check on them, they could be a good alternative. And I think there are others now as well. Then you've got your traditional block phones, the sort of Nokia type, or Blockius as they're sometimes called, that, have text and call function, but don't have the kind of access to the internet. And recently there's been a new introduction into the market, and I think there's another one coming as well. It's a sort of smartphone, but it's really limited, restricted functionality. So there's something at the moment that's available called a balance phone, which has access to certain apps like Google Maps, Spotify for the music. I think there is the ability to access a browser. And actually, I've just contacted them because I wanted to understand how restricted is that access, because obviously you can access anything through a browser. So it's no good not having the apps, but actually you can access YouTube and TikTok through a browser. And then WhatsApp, which is a bit more controversial, but it is the messaging app that they enable.
Okay.
So there are alternatives is the point. So I would say to parents where all of this is ahead of them, really think about whether they need their own personal device and maybe keep it to a family, set time, set places in the house where you can see them more easily, keep an eye on them, and avoid use of devices in bedrooms at all times.
And talk to them about it and explain the dangers of it. So if they understand the dangers, and it's difficult for kids of that age to understand what's out there in the world, I guess, and to understand the dangers. But if you start talking to them maybe from just an early age.
Absolutely. The conversations are key. All the way through, all the way from that young age up to the teenagers, trying to keep those conversations open and frequent. It's a really important message to keep communicating with your child because they really don't understand, especially when they're younger, the ramifications of sharing something. We did a focus group once with 9 and 10-year-olds and then 11 and 12-year-olds. And we asked them in it, would they feel more comfortable sharing a little video of themselves, so maybe just them talking to camera in their bedroom. Would they prefer to share it on YouTube, or would they prefer to put it on a USB stick and give it to one random stranger in the street?
Yeah.
And without question, every single one of them was horrified by the idea of giving it to a random person on the street. Like, why would you do that? You're nuts. They did not see the same issues at all with YouTube because they felt they had more control. Well, I can take it down. I can edit it. They felt that they could, this control piece was there when it, of course, isn't, especially if you've got a kind of open account and anyone can see your content.
Yeah. And just when you mention control, then if we talk about online safety and parental controls, what are the most effective parental controls and how can parents help protect the children? There you can go into the settings and you can do all of these things, can't you?
You can, absolutely. And we would really encourage parents to do that, to use those technical controls. So you can look at controls at the device level. So there's options to kind of pair your device as the parent or carer. So the Google offer Google Family Link, Apple offer family sharing. But it's just a way of connecting your device to theirs and controlling things like downloads, age restrictions, time spent, filtering, app downloads. So those are kind of the basic, and they're entirely free. So they're really worth using. And with Google, you can set up like an email account and you can put in the age, and then the associated apps like YouTube should also follow suit in terms of the restricted settings based on the age. But bear in mind with any of these things that there are ways around them. So something like YouTube, you might have the restrictions in place, but they can just access it as a guest through a browser. TikTok, they can access content through a browser. So you're not entirely locking it down. And I think it's important to be aware of that. You still need to be having the conversations. I also check my daughter's device. That's one of the things that I said from the outset that I would be doing. And I wouldn't do it behind her back. And it was just to keep an eye on things like friends lists, content being looked at and so on. So I do think it's another way. I know some parents feel that that's an invasion of privacy, but in my house, that's what we do. And I would encourage others to do the same, especially when they're young, if you are giving them a device when they're a bit younger. So those are some of the things you can do. So technical controls are great, but you just can't rely on them.
Okay, so maybe they think that they've got all these controls in place, but like you say, the kids can still access it as a guest. And
even have separate accounts. Like they might have the Snapchat account that mum and dad can see, or the Instagram account, but there might be another account that they set up. And some of the apps encourage you to hide content. Even WhatsApp would do that. So I think that's problematic from a child point of view. And I've sort of questioned this with them. You can lock chats and with a PIN code and so on. So you do need to be mindful that even with technical restrictions that you're putting in place, they may not entirely remove all risk or ability for them to access inappropriate content. So the oversight, the ground rules, the conversations are all part. I call it tools in the toolkit of any parent. So the technical controls are one of the tools that you have, but there are other things that you also need to be doing.
Yeah. And how would you recognize if your child was receiving some online harassment? What are the signs that you'd look out for in your child, maybe?
Well, similar to signs where something is wrong in general, like that they may be a bit more withdrawn, they're hiding stuff, they're a bit more furtive around, especially around the device, maybe shutting the screen down or not wanting to talk about it. So it's really trying to keep it as far as you can open, that you're charging your devices in one central place overnight and that you will check the device and you're having these conversations. But yeah, a general change in behavior, maybe they seem a bit more anxious or withdrawn. It could also be that a teacher mentions something to you about changes that they're seeing around happiness in the classroom or homework or whatever. So really just keeping an eye on how they're doing in general.
And supposing if you do see that somebody is just something not right and you feel like it could be something to do with cyberbullying, what would they do? What would be the best thing for parents to do?
Well, obviously trying to talk to your child and understand if something is going on and whether they will talk to you about it. Maybe, again, talking to the teacher. Have they noticed anything different? Because it's often related to peers that they know in the classroom or the sports club, or just trying to understand what's going on. Also checking, is there lots of messages being deleted, that's in a conversation, or are you seeing a bit of meanness or targeting? It could also be that they're seeing somebody else being bullied and are really uncomfortable about it and don't know what to say. So it's trying to keep all of these conversations as open as possible and recognizing, unfortunately, it is reasonably common for children. Between 25 and 30% of children will experience cyberbullying. So
between 25 and 30%?
Yeah. Looking at our trends and usage data, children reporting experience of cyberbullying in the last year. Yeah, it is. And it rises between primary and secondary school. It's over a third in secondary school. So it is quite common, and it is something that we need to look out for and try and support children through.
Yeah. One thing just from the conversation that's coming into my head about if you're going to be checking the child's phone and they can hide things, it's kind of, I don't know if you call it reverse psychology, but do you think if they think you're going to be checking their phone, will that push them more into trying to hide more things from you? And obviously you're trying to keep the conversation and everything, but does that make it worse in some ways?
I mean, I think especially for parents of younger kids, it's a really important strategy. This is just what we do in this household. There's an openness around it. Yeah, I mean, children do hide stuff from their parents online and offline. And, it's something to be aware of. And that's why keeping an eye on their general well-being and how they seem is important as well, that you might pick up cues that way.
See, I'm just thinking about myself as a parent. I've missed all of these start-off dates and I'm thinking, how can I roll back? But hopefully I've been communicating with them. But, I think that the advice for the parents who are starting out and they have that awful fear of giving the kids an iPhone and the devices, that if they're aware of it and they start those boundaries from the very beginning, and like you said, this is just the way we do it in this house.
Yeah.
It's just normal. It's just the way we do it.
And we have to recognize every parent is different. Every household is different. There may not be one set thing that suits everybody. There are general principles that I think would really be worthwhile applying across all households. And that would be, for one, keeping devices out of bedrooms.
Yeah.
That is going to be beneficial, just even purely from a good sleep perspective. Children and young people need a lot of sleep to the extent that we can, trying to keep them out of bedrooms because they just are so disruptive and impacting on that kind of overall well-being and mental health as well. These constant distractions. And I think bearing in mind, thinking about it from a mental health perspective as well, there are so much on our devices that is addictive, is holding our attention for as long as possible. So trying to have, this really kind of healthy practice as far as we can, and it is challenging for all of us, as far as we can in the household, the better it will be.
And Alex, just for the listeners, that all of this information, all of these tips can be found as CyberSafe Kids on your website as well. So for anybody who's listening, that's where they can go and they can get all these, because I was looking on your website in preparation for this and you have so much information. You've simplified it in a way that it's not a complex issue. It's just really good information for parents. So I'd advise anybody to go to it to have a look, particularly people who are starting out or people may have difficulties and their teenagers are having difficulties. So if we look then again at TikTok, so TikTok to me, it's kids dancing. Oh, let's do a TikTok. And ma'am, do you want to come into it or whatever?
And TikTok itself, like Snapchat, like Instagram and YouTube and WhatsApp, have got this 13 in their minimum age requirements in their terms and conditions. And that comes from a US law called COPPA, which is the Child Online Privacy and Protection Act.
Okay.
It dates back even a couple of decades. And so historically, that's where this age of 13 has come from. It's not based on science or, this is, a child wakes up on their 13th birthday and automatically is developmentally ready for all that comes with, being online. It comes from this legislation. Actually, then in Europe, the GDPR came in 2018. And as part of GDPR, there was for the first time a consideration of children's data rights. And they felt it was important to put an age at which you had to have parental consent in order to collect a child's data. So looking at these TikToks and the Instagrams, in order to collect that child's data, they needed parental consent to do so. So this came in 2018. We were given the option across Europe to set our own age between 13 and 16. We went for the most stringent in Ireland of 16.
Okay.
So it depends. So you could look at the minimum age requirement. You could look at the digital age of consent in Ireland, which is actually 16. But then we realized fairly quickly that consent is only one legal basis on which a company like TikTok can collect data.
Yeah.
There are other legal bases, including legitimate interests. So unfortunately, that was largely ignored. It's been, to my mind, largely ineffective. Now, the Data Protection Commission may say otherwise and say, actually, we are going to go after these companies that we find to be breaching children's data rights. And they have been. I mean, there have been cases that we're all aware of in recent years of breaches. The problem is there's a bit of a lag. So often companies are saying, well, we've changed it all now. So that was 4 years ago. And now we have more stringent controls. Like we have, for example, in 2021, many of the companies introduced privacy by default, which was something they could have done years before. So just meaning that a child's account, when you set it up as a child's account, so typically between 13 and 16 is considered a child account for each of these companies, that their account would be private by default as opposed to public. So most of us set it up and it's public by default because it suits these companies that we have a more open account and more sharing and engagement. But for children in 2021, it was changed because of a new piece of legislation in the UK. So they made that change because they knew that this was coming into play in September 2021. It was called the Age Appropriate Design Code. Sorry, it's probably getting a bit complicated, legalistic, but
I suppose it's important as well to realise that obviously we're playing catch up, but there is stuff being done and people are trying to implement things, but maybe we just have to work a bit faster.
Well, and then you've got people saying, can't we just ban it? Can we not just make it illegal?
In Australia, didn't they ban?
So they've just passed legislation a few months ago to ban they're saying ban social media for under 16s, but actually in the detail that we have, and there isn't a lot of detail yet, to be honest, and even how they would enforce it, we don't know that information yet. So there's still a lot to clarify, but the apps that they're talking about, to my mind, are not comprehensive. You'd be better actually looking at what the harm is to children in these online environments. And that's been very clearly articulated by far greater experts than me around things like content risks, contact risks, contract risks, and conduct risks. So contact is obvious, it's people contacting your children, who maybe don't have their best interests and that kind of openness to being able to connect with anybody. Conduct risk would be things like cyberbullying and how you're behaving online.
Yeah.
Content equally is this kind of inappropriate content for the age that they are. and contractors around that more commercial piece, the ads, the data, that kind of thing.
So instead of banning an outright ban that they're talking about doing in Australia, that they want to do in Australia, it's more realistic to look at what you're talking about.
It's more realistic to say, what are the harms children are facing and how can we really address those harms across the board? So, for example, a really simple thing is that the Australian proposals don't include any gaming platforms. And yet something like Roblox is one of the most popular apps that children use in Ireland, aged 8 to 12. So for that younger age cohort, you've got huge numbers of children playing a game that is marketed to children for sure, but has problematic features, including inappropriate contact. So we need to be looking at creating safety by design, safer online spaces, and really compelling these companies who, at the end of the day, are profiting enormously from their users, including children. And we know that they're profiting from advertising to children and selling their data. They need to be compelled to create, just as we have with offline spaces like playgrounds and schools or youth centres. These spaces are designed to be safe and appropriate for the ages of the children that are going to be using them. And if things go wrong in those spaces, if a child falls and breaks their arm in a playground, there will be accountability there. Some local authority will likely be responsible. And it may be that it was unavoidable, but it may be the things they need to do to adjust it to make it safer for the children that are going to be using it. They're generally fenced off, soft ground materials that they use in playgrounds. So we need that same thinking logic, a bit like our Same Rules Apply campaign. We need this same approach to online spaces that children inhabit because, there's lots of great stuff children can access online, information, learning, education. There are games that really stimulate critical thinking skills or lateral thinking skills. So to completely blanket cut them off from everything isn't the answer either. But we do need to ensure that they are not going to be exposed to the level of risk that they currently are exposed to. So an outright ban sounds simple, sounds like the answer. But what are we talking about? Are we banning smartphones? Are we banning certain social media? Are we banning it all?
Yeah. No, Alex, you explain it so well because it's like you have the world we live in and then you have the online world. What I'm taking from it is we need the same safety measures in whichever way we can because this world is here. It's all around us. So we need to just protect as much as we can and make people accountable.
The accountability. So I think there's positive things that are happening, really positive things, especially among parents, actually, like shout out to parents. What we're seeing, and we're actually seeing it in our data as well a little bit, is that parents are coming together. You've seen these movements, right? It Takes a Village in Greystones.
I've just heard one on the radio this morning.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Gen Free Initiative in Waterford. There are lots of schools and parent communities attached to schools coming together and saying, actually, is it better that we hold off in giving these things to our kids, whether it's the phone, whether it's access to the likes of Snapchat? That's really positive. And a very tangible example of that is that when my daughter was going into first year, she was the only one that wasn't on Snapchat, TikTok or Instagram.
How did you manage that? Did she not feel totally left out?
Yeah, very difficult, very challenging. But I strongly felt that the risks outweighed the benefits, just from what I knew and understood.
Yeah.
And it was really difficult. Now, she did have a means of communicating with her friends, and so that kind of saved us in a sense, and she was actively communicating with her friends. But I did hold off.
Well, that was very brave as a parent.
Well, yeah, you feel like an outlier. Yeah,
I can imagine. I mean, everybody else has it. It's like the football jersey. Everybody else has it. Why can't I? Or the shoes. You had to stick by your guns, and that was very difficult, but it was very brave, and she got through it.
Well, I did give her the phone. So this was the thing. I gave her the phone at the end of 6th class.
Right.
Because I knew she was going into secondary school, but I just didn't allow access to a lot of apps. Now, I had my blind spots too, which were that browser. I was thinking very specifically of apps. Her YouTube consumption was, vast. And that was something I, have had to keep an eye on. But then for my son, who's going into first year, it's totally different. There's a whole group, more than 100 parents of children coming into first year in the same school who are choosing to hold off in whatever form. They might give them the phone, but they might not give them access. They might not give them the phone. They might give them the alternatives.
Yeah.
But the point is, all these parents are considering holding off in some way. And I think that's really positive so that he won't be the only one. So he knows this. And I see this movement happening. It's still small. I would still say it's the minority, but I feel like it's got that potential. The groundswell is there. Programs like Adolescence or this Netflix 4-part series, which has generated such a lot of conversation recently, is only adding fuel to that fire for parents to say, do you know what, this isn't good enough. Where it's not so positive from my point of view is what's happening in the tech space. What I'm seeing is this move away from accountability, responsibility. You look at where X has gone as a platform, and bear in mind, one of the main sources of pornographic content for children or to be able to find it is on a platform like X that doesn't, have rules around it. It's allowable content. But also you look at Meta, which has 3 really key services. Facebook, okay, Facebook's not really used by kids, but Instagram and WhatsApp absolutely are. And they're saying that for Facebook and Instagram, they're going to move away from fact checking and moderation. And also DEI kind of policies that protect people,
so
minorities.
Be a free for all, basically.
Yeah, that they're going to follow X's model and use this community notes system, which has proven really ineffective on X. So the idea that they would move towards that is a very big backward step to my mind.
But to me, that sounds like a huge industry. What can we do as parents? Is that what you're saying, that some parents are just taking a step back from it? Or that's a huge issue.
Parents need to step in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is not the time to step back. This is the time to build on this momentum, find other parents that are also concerned, come together. Like I was talking to a parent the other day, and she was the one that set up, in her daughter's going into secondary school this year, and she was the one that set up the group. And they've only got 15 people. And she sort of was a bit glum about it. Oh, we've only got... And I said, 15 is a real start. You could have 3. You just need a few other like-minded, and hopefully it will build over time so that your child isn't the only one that is not going to have the levels of access. But I do think it is really unfortunate the way the tech companies are going. But I suppose we have to bear in mind we're in Europe and we do tend towards stronger regulations. We certainly don't have a perfect model yet. I still think the regulation is largely focused on addressing harm once it's happened rather than saying, how can we stop this harm happening in the first place? Which comes back to that safety by design piece, which is so too often absent in the design thinking and consideration. So there is a lot that needs to change, but I'm hopeful that, I said we've been running 10 years. I'm hoping in 10 years' time, this will all look very different.
Yeah. And just, Alex, even going back to the child, the impact that the online, I know we've spoken about sleep and you said, the interrupted sleep, but what other issues would children have if they're online all the time? Like there's mental health issues that they're suffering from as well because of it.
Well, yeah, because
and exposed to
what they're using on these devices, often designed to hold their attention for as long as possible, is really difficult to put down. And actually, any adults that's used
I
these
find
apps,
difficult myself sometimes.
Exactly.
And I mean, the kids sometimes say, Mum, you're not listening to me. You're looking at your phone. But of course, I say, well, I'm reading the news.
Or I'm reading important emails.
Yeah. How do I give that excuse when the kids, like you said earlier, but I can't imagine the mental health of kids. And you must have evidence of that as well.
There is well-documented evidence of children being targeted based on their age and gender. So we know, for example, girls, it'd be a lot around kind of how you look. So self-esteem is impacted. Body image, body dysmorphia, these are things that can really be impacted, especially if you're more vulnerable. We know that it doesn't affect children in all the same ways, but the more vulnerable children are likely offline are more likely to be vulnerable online too.
Yeah.
For boys, we've got this kind of very difficult, toxic narratives that are being perpetuated about masculinity and what it means to be a man. And obviously, we don't even need to mention the names of people who are perpetuating these messages, but their reach is far and wide through these different apps that children and young people are engaging with. There was a very good study by DCU 2 years ago looking at TikTok and YouTube and the algorithm and how it's targeting boys and men around some of these very toxic messages. And so I think that accountability piece, we need to be putting back on companies saying we should not be targeting children in these ways with these really unhelpful and unhealthy narratives. And then, of course, you've got the porn industry, which is probably a whole nother conversation, and how that's impacting on developing minds and expectations and what is considered normal behavior. So there are many, many challenges that we still need to address.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's mind-boggling really. And I think the foresight that you guys had even setting up 10 years ago, you're obviously so well versed in it. One of the other things I was thinking about is digital footprint, because I remember saying to my nephew years ago when I really didn't know much about the internet, I'd say, well, don't be putting anything online because if you're going for a job, everybody will see it. But kids put so much stuff online and now they can't take it down. How do you explain that to a child?
Yeah, it is. It's really tricky. And we do cover this absolutely in our content when we're talking to children because it's such a big issue. We actually had an ad. We ran an ad a few years ago, 2 footprints. So one tiny footprint and it said, Paul, aged 44. and then one really large footprint of Paul's daughter, age 12, because it was trying to make the point that the digital footprint was all the larger because of that openness to sharing and not necessarily understanding the ramifications of sharing so much about yourself online, this huge digital footprint. So we sometimes say to kids, have you ever Googled yourself to see like what comes up? Are there photos of you? Their comments about you? To the extent that you can, it shouldn't be public information, really. What we see, unfortunately, is that kids value popularity over privacy. So it's all the harder to try and get those concepts across to kids about why it's important to value.
Because they see the more likes they have, the better it is.
But so do adults. So, trying to explain these concepts to children is all the harder. We do have tangible examples. So there was a young editor of Teen Vogue who was appointed. And in the end, her employment was rescinded because they found comments she'd made when she was about 16 or 17 on social media that had a kind of racial overtone. She ended up losing that opportunity, probably the opportunity of her lifetime to get this fabulous job. We have other examples of students that have been turned away from really prestigious universities because they posted negative things online that were publicly available. So being mindful of how this might impact on you. And I think one good strategy for that is getting older young people to talk to. We did a thing early on. We worked with Spun Out in a closed Facebook group. We asked, and their target audience is obviously 16 to 25, but we asked them what message would they give to their younger selves? So what message would they give to their 12-year-old self on how to be safe online? And it was so poignant and in some of the cases rather sad. I wish I had known that these people I didn't know shouldn't be telling me about how I feel about myself, or I wish I hadn't posted so much about myself. So I think that's a helpful way of trying to get children to understand if they've got like a 16 or a 17-year-old or even an 18-year-old telling them to think about these things, then we're perhaps more likely to listen.
Oh, yeah. And then the other scary thing, and we've mentioned
pornography is just a massive industry. And I think it's really important to recognize it is a huge, wealthy, powerful industry with a lobbying group with great potential to lobby. So I think we need to be really mindful of this. And it is a vastly different world to the one that perhaps we grew up in, where the access to that kind of content was largely through a sort of very well thumbed through magazine that was shared through lots of kids. What they're seeing is so much more realistic. And trying to then challenge that message that it isn't a representation of real is all the more challenging. There was a study by Ofsted, the official schools inspection body in the UK, of secondary schools in the UK, and found that sexual harassment, particularly of girls, was normalised. It was just normal in so many secondary schools. And they put this down in part to the easy access to pornography. So we really need to be thinking about messaging around things like consent and acceptable behavior and expectations, all of these things.
And then you go on to AI and all of them. I mean, that's just exploded over the last number of years. There's such good things in relation to AI, and we've spoken at length to other contributors about AI and the importance of AI even in healthcare. But then the dangers, the kids are exposed to with AI. So it's like we've been saying throughout this conversation, there's so much good, but there's so much that is so much danger too.
Well, and it would all look quite different if we were designing this stuff with children's safety in mind. To my mind, a couple of years ago, Snapchat rolled out this feature, My AI, which they had up to that point tested on just their private subscribers. So people who pay for an account were allowed to access this My AI bot. Then they just rolled it out overnight with no checks or balances.
So what is My AI bot?
It's a chatbot. It's an AI-powered chatbot. So you ask me anything.
Okay.
It is now possible through parental controls to disable that feature. And it was tested in those early days by researchers who found that sometimes it was returning inappropriate or factually incorrect information. And that is one of the big challenges with a huge flow of mis and disinformation. And if you look at a platform like X, obviously that has become, almost the norm that these certain narratives are played out in these online spaces. So again, we need to focus on equipping children to the extent that we can, both at home and in schools through conversations, through learning to develop critical thinking skills and to have a natural wariness about not just people that they're encountering online, but content they're encountering online. Is this true? Where else can I find this? How can I fact check this? Certainly before I share it with anyone else. Because we live in this age where information flows so freely, which has great benefits, but there are far too few checks and balances over mis and disinformation. And we have to bear in mind that children are largely getting their news sources from online sources and social media. So if there aren't those checks and balances, this could be shaping their worldview. And we know it shapes adults,
Absolutely. I'm thinking of all the different advertisements and the marketing that I'm constantly seeing. I'm being bombarded by it. I mention something and next thing it's up on my phone and it's up on my phone. So I can't imagine what that's like targeting kids, and they can't specifically target the child. And I suppose I'm working in health and wellbeing, so I'm thinking about alcohol and vapes and all the difficulties children have with sugary foods, and they're constantly getting all of this information.
And there's a lack of accountability around it. There was a study I heard of recently where advertisers were categoric that they weren't advertising unhealthy foods, but the problem was it was going through influencers. So influencers were doing that work,
For the advertisers.
For the advertisers, yeah. So those messages, which are very difficult to counter because, you see these fast food ads and it induces hunger. You look at it and you want it. And it doesn't matter if you counter them with the same number of healthy food ads. They don't have that same response. They don't elicit that same response. So it is very challenging. And, even look back to a couple of weeks ago, that book, Careless People, was published about Meta. And, one of the allegations that the author made about Meta, she was working a very senior public policy role, was that if a girl posted a selfie of herself and then took it down, they would immediately serve up a beauty ad to that child.
So does that mean, okay, well, you took your photograph down because you didn't really like it of yourself, but if you use this good beauty product.
Yeah, it's another way of making them feel not so good about themselves and buying something. Exactly. But it's obviously not a good practice.
So instantly they delete the photograph, the beauty product comes up.
According to this allegation in this book, yeah.
Oh my goodness. So, okay. So where are we now? Let's give the parents listening maybe some practical advice of how they can educate themselves and how they can help their children.
So a starting point would be information is power in this situation. The more informed you are as a parent around the pros and the cons, the more likely you are to be able to make a good decision for your child. And certainly you don't want to be a decision based on pressure, social pressure from your child. It needs to be because you think it's the right time. You're comfortable that this is appropriate for your child if we're talking about an app or a game. There's so much great advice out there. So, for example, if your child comes home and says they want to be in Minecraft or Roblox, look it up, see what the experts say. There's a great website called Common Sense Media that provides app by app, game by game advice, their own expert view, but also they'll put child view, they'll put the parent view on. So it's a very balanced, holistic view. So, really worthwhile. Other things you could look at for games are PEGI ratings, which give you a guide on the appropriateness of the content and whether there's kind of violence or sexual content. Because what we're certainly seeing is about a third of boys in the 8 to 12-year-old category are playing over 18s games. And, they are over 18s, they are adult rated. So I think we need parents to be really checking out these things themselves before allowing access to their children. And then if they are allowing access, putting ground rules around use and access. Okay, you can be on Snapchat, but only if my account is paired with yours. You're time limited. I'm going to check it. There's things you can put into place around that. So really avail of the information. We've also got attached to our Same Rules Apply campaign, we've got the Better Digital Parenting Guide on our website, which is absolutely free. It's sponsored by the HSE. So go and have a look. We've got loads of great advice in there, whether you're a parent of a teen or a parent of a younger child. Hopefully we've covered as much bases in that guide. There's webwise.ie. There's Spun Out, which I mentioned earlier, which has fantastic advice if you're a parent of older kids, or even if you're a young person yourself listening. There's Jigsaw as well in terms of mental health supports that are available to children and young people. So there's loads of great services and advice out there that you can reference. And another key thing, of course, is the conversations that we've talked about a lot that are so important.
Yeah. Well, Alex, there's so much information there, but there is so much resources out there for people to educate themselves and to educate their children and to help them. So just to take 3 steps today for our listeners, let them keep screens out of bedrooms. This is what I'm hearing from you, Alex. Start open conversations, talk early, talk often, and listen to your children. Sometimes easier said than done. Check out cybersafekids.ie for tools and tips. And digital parenting doesn't mean that we have all the answers, because none of us have all the answers, but we just need to educate ourselves and try and be the best parents that we can be for our children. That brings me to the end of today's episode of HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing. Please share this episode with family and friends and colleagues if you think it would be of value to them. I'd like to give a big thank you to Alex Cooney from CyberSafe Kids for all of the insights and her expertise in this area. Thank you for listening.